At my husband's funeral, my son Marcus stood on the podium and thanked another woman. She was the one who was truly there for my dad, he said, his voice firm as though his loyalty to her was the truest thing in the world. I sat there in the front pew, my gloved hands folded neatly in my lap, staring at the gleaming mahogany casket that held the body of my husband of 45 years. My chest felt hollow, but my ears burned with every word my only son spoke. Marcus didn't look at me once. Instead, his eyes sought out Vanessa, the young woman sitting across the aisle in a sleek black dress that hugged her curves, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She gave him a faint smile, the kind of smile that said, "Yes, that's right, you're mine now." I wanted to cry, to stand up, to shout, but I didn't. I sat there, still and composed, like I had always been expected to be, but inside, I was breaking. My name is Loretta Johnson. I'm 68 years old. I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, but I've spent most of my adult life here in Atlanta, Georgia. For the better part of nearly 5 decades, I was Charles Johnson's wife. Together we raised 2 children, Marcus, my only son, and Angela, my daughter. Together we built a home, a legacy, a life. At least, that's what I thought. I never expected that on the day I laid my husband to rest, I would sit in the same room and hear my son call another woman his mother. It's hard to describe what that kind of betrayal feels like. People always think grief is about death, about losing the one you love, but grief is layered. That day, I realized I was grieving more than Charles's death. I was grieving the loss of my son's loyalty, the years of sacrifice that seemed to vanish in an instant, and the quiet dignity of a marriage that, to the outside world, had seemed unbreakable. Marcus had always been his father's pride. I can still remember when he was just a boy, running around in the yard with a football bigger than his head. Charles used to sit on the porch, cigar in hand, smiling like he'd won the lottery just watching him. He wanted Marcus to be strong, sharp, ambitious, and in many ways, he got what he wanted. Marcus grew up determined, charming, and bold. But charm can be dangerous. Boldness can turn reckless. Somewhere along the way, my boy stopped listening to me and started following his father's shadow. And when Charles began leaning on Vanessa, Marcus leaned right along with him. Angela, on the other hand, was mine. My baby girl has always been close to me. She's strong in a quieter way, thoughtful, steady, and stubborn when she needs to be. She was sitting beside me that day at the funeral, her hand wrapped tightly around mine, as if she knew that if she let go, I might shatter. I don't know how I would have survived those moments without her fingers squeezing mine. But let me tell you about the woman who sat across from me. Vanessa Brooks. She's the kind of woman who walks into a room and makes sure everybody notices her. Tall, with flawless skin, not a hair out of place. She had the kind of confidence that made people whisper. Some whispered in admiration, others in disgust. She was nearly 30 years younger than Charles, and though she played the part of the grieving mistress that day, I had seen behind her mask. I knew the way she had looked at me over the years, smug, daring me to acknowledge what she had stolen. I never did. I kept my silence. I smiled when people whispered. I held my head high when rumors swirled, because that's what I was taught. A woman like me, a Black woman of my generation, had to carry her pain with dignity. We weren't allowed the luxury of falling apart. So I sat there, in my Sunday black dress, my veil drawn just enough to hide my eyes, while my son, my flesh and blood, called another woman his mother. Angela stiffened beside me. I could feel her rage burning hotter than my own. "Mama," she whispered under her breath, "don't let him talk like that. Don't just sit here and let him do this. But I did sit there, because sometimes silence is more powerful than a scream. People often ask me, what kept me with Charles all those years? Why stay with a man who strayed? The truth is, love is complicated. Charles was not an easy man, but he was mine. We built something from nothing. When we married, he had dreams bigger than his pockets, and I worked double shifts to keep food on the table while he chased them. I stood by him when he failed, and I prayed with him until he succeeded. By the time his company took off, by the time he was respected in Atlanta's business circles, I was no longer just a wife. I was the foundation beneath his empire. People clapped for him, but it was my hands that had built the stage he stood on. That's why Vanessa's presence cut so deep. She hadn't been there for the hungry nights, the eviction notices, the exhaustion. She didn't know the sound of Charles cursing under his breath when the bills stacked too high. No, she came later, when the money was flowing, when Charles's name carried weight. She came when it was easy. At the funeral, the pastor gave a sermon about love, forgiveness, and eternity. His words flowed over me, but I barely heard them. I kept staring at Marcus, at the way he leaned toward Vanessa like she was his anchor. When the service ended, people filed past me, offering hugs and condolences. Some avoided my eyes, whispering behind their hands. Others gave me that pitying look I'd come to hate. But I didn't break. Not there. Not then. Because here's what no one knew. Not Marcus, not Vanessa, not even Angela. Charles may have tried to rewrite history. He may have let that woman believe she could take my place. But I knew something that would change everything. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my quiet house. The flowers from the funeral filled the living room, their perfume sickly sweet. The silence pressed in on me, heavier than any coffin. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and sat at the kitchen table where Charles and I had shared countless meals, arguments, and plans. My hands trembled, but not from grief. I was holding a secret that had the power to turn everything upside down. They thought I was finished. They thought they had taken everything. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. If you're feeling the weight of this story so far, if it resonates with you in any way, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter. And before we continue, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know.
Marcus wasted no time after the funeral. The very next day, he showed up at my house with Vanessa trailing behind him, her heels clicking against the wooden floors like a gavel announcing my sentence. I had just finished making myself a cup of coffee when I heard the door creak open. He didn't even knock. My own son, walking into my house as if it already belonged to someone else. "Mama," he said, with that rehearsed calmness that sounded more like condescension, "we need to talk." I set the coffee down slowly, my fingers wrapping tightly around the mug as if the heat could stop me from shaking. "Do we, Marcus?" I asked, my eyes fixed on the woman standing smugly beside him. Vanessa wore a tailored black pantsuit this time, sharp lines that made her look like she belonged in some boardroom rather than in my living room. Her perfume lingered, heavy and sweet, invading the air I'd breathed in this house for decades. "Yes," she said, cutting in before my son could answer. "It's only right we set some things straight. Charles wanted me to handle his affairs, and Marcus will be by my side while I do. I don't want there to be any confusion." Confusion. That was her word. She was standing in the very house I chose with Charles when all we had was a beat-up car and a shoebox of dreams, and she was talking about confusion. I smiled, but it wasn't from humor. It was the kind of smile that makes people uneasy because they can't tell what lies behind it. The only confusion I see, Vanessa, is how you thought you'd walk in here and claim what isn't yours." Marcus stepped forward, his tone sharper now. "Mama, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Dad loved her. You know that. He wanted her to have control. He made sure his will reflected that." I took a long sip of my coffee, ignoring the way my stomach churned. "Do you believe that?" I asked, meeting his eyes. He hesitated, just for a second, but then his jaw tightened and he nodded. "Yes, I do." That hesitation was enough for me. I tucked it away in my mind like a seed I would water later. Angela came rushing in from the hallway, her eyes blazing. "You've got some nerve showing up here," she snapped at Vanessa. "This is my mother's home. Our family's home. You don't get to just waltz in here and take it." Vanessa smirked, tilting her head like a cat watching a mouse struggle. "Sweetheart, I don't want to fight, but this house is part of Charles's estate, and soon enough the papers will make it clear. I'm only trying to be civil about it." Civil? That word nearly made me laugh. Angela took a step closer to her brother. "And you're really siding with her over your own mother." Marcus's face hardened, but I saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I'm doing what Dad wanted. It's not about sides." But of course, it was about sides, and my son had chosen his. I placed the mug down carefully, standing with all the dignity I could muster. "You've said what you came to say," I told them, my voice steady, even though my hands trembled. "Now get out of my house." Vanessa opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. Out. For a moment, Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my eyes must have stopped him. He grabbed Vanessa's arm and they left, her heels clicking down the hallway like victory drums. When the door shut, Angela turned to me, her face twisted with anger and pain. "Mama, we can't let them do this. We have to fight." I sank back into my chair, my body heavy with exhaustion. "We will," I whispered, "but not like this. Not yet." Angela dropped to her knees beside me, clutching my hand. "What are you waiting for?" she demanded. I looked into her eyes, the same brown eyes she had as a child, wide with fear and stubbornness. "For the right moment," I said. "Patience, baby. Patience." The days after the funeral were a blur of whispers, phone calls, and paperwork. Everywhere I went, people stared. Some gave me sympathetic looks, but others let their curiosity slip through in hushed tones. "Poor Loretta," I heard one woman whisper at the grocery store. "Imagine being replaced like that right in front of everybody." I kept my head high, but every word was a stone in my chest. The humiliation wasn't just private, it was public. At church that Sunday, the whispers followed me down the aisle. Some of the older women tried to comfort me with pats on the shoulder and scripture, but I could see the judgment in their eyes too. To them, I had failed as a wife. To them, a man doesn't wander unless something's lacking at home. They didn't know. They didn't know the nights I lay awake alone while Charles worked late or claimed to. They didn't know how many times I swallowed my pride just to keep our family intact. I sat in the pew, my Bible resting in my lap, but I couldn't focus on the sermon. My mind kept going back to Vanessa, to the way she'd looked at me in my own home, as if I were nothing more than a guest in her kingdom. But kingdoms fall, and she would learn that soon enough.
One evening, Angela came over with a stack of papers in her hand. "Mama, look at this," she said, dropping them onto the kitchen table. "She's already making moves. She's filing to sell the vacation property in Savannah, and she's talking about liquidating some of Dad's company assets." My chest tightened. That property had been a dream for Charles and me, a place by the water where we used to imagine retiring. And now she wanted to sell it like it was just another bargaining chip. Angela leaned across the table, her voice low and urgent. "We can't sit back any longer. She's going to dismantle everything Dad built, everything you built." I looked at the papers, my jaw tightening. "I know," I said softly. "Then why aren't you doing anything?" Angela's voice cracked with frustration. "She's walking all over us, Mama, and Marcus is just letting her." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "Angela, listen to me. Sometimes the strongest move isn't striking first. Sometimes it's letting your opponent get comfortable, letting them think they've already won. That's when their guard drops. That's when you move." Angela shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't understand how you can be so calm." I smiled faintly, though it didn't reach my eyes. "Because I know something they don't." That night, when Angela left, I went into my bedroom and opened the top drawer of my nightstand. Beneath the neatly folded scarves lay a small, worn envelope. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Inside was the document I had kept hidden for years, the real will. Charles had signed it a long time ago, back when our marriage still had the illusion of solidity, back when I had convinced him, in one of his rare moments of guilt, to secure the future of his family. He never thought I kept a copy. He never thought I'd be the one to use it. But I had always known this day might come. A woman doesn't stay married for 45 years without learning to prepare for storms. I ran my fingers over the paper, the ink slightly faded but still clear. My name, Angela's name, Marcus's name too. Proof that once, before the lies and betrayals, Charles had recognized the truth. I was the one who stood by him. I was the one who sacrificed. I was the one who earned the right to carry his legacy. I whispered into the quiet of my room, as if Charles could hear me from wherever he was. "You thought you could erase me, but you forgot who I am. I'm Loretta Johnson, and I don't break." The next morning, Vanessa sent me a notice through her lawyer. She was filing to have me evicted from the house. I read the letter slowly, carefully, then folded it neatly and placed it on the counter. My heart was pounding, but my face remained calm. Vanessa stormed in not long after, waving the same notice in her hand. "Mama, this is it. We can't wait anymore. She's trying to throw you out of your own home." I looked at her, steady and unflinching. "Let her try." Angela gaped at me. "What do you mean, let her try?" I reached out and touched her cheek gently. "Because, baby, when she drags me into that courtroom, that's when I'll end it. That's when the world will see the truth. And when I pull out that will, she won't know what hit her." Angela's eyes widened, realization dawning. You have it, don't you?" I smiled, for the first time in weeks, a real smile. "Yes, I do." And that was the beginning. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was finished. But they had no idea the storm I was about to unleash. At night, when the house was finally quiet, I sat alone in the living room staring at the photographs on the wall. Some were old and fading, wedding pictures of Henry and me when we were young, smiling, believing in forever. Others were newer. Family gatherings, birthdays, Christmas dinners, my grandchildren sitting on my lap. Each one felt like a betrayal now, because I realized so many of those smiles had been lies. That woman, Selena, was not new in my husband's life. She had been around long enough for my own son to see her as Mom. The thought clawed at my chest. My boy, the child I carried for 9 long months, the one I stayed up with when he had fevers, the one I cheered for at his school plays, now turned against me so easily, and Henry had allowed it. I leaned forward and pressed my forehead against my palms. My bones ached, not just from age, but from the weight of humiliation. All these years, I thought I was building a legacy with Henry, something our children could be proud of. Instead, he had been weaving a secret life behind my back, feeding another woman's dreams while leaving me scraps. I remembered the way Selena stood at the funeral, dressed in a sleek black dress, her hair styled like she was at a fashion show, not burying the man who lay in the coffin. She didn't cry. Not once. She simply smiled, that smug, knowing smile, while people whispered. And when my son, my own flesh and blood, wrapped his arm around her waist and called her mom, it nearly killed me. But I didn't collapse. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. No, I smiled. Because I knew something they didn't. Henry had left 2 wills, and only one of them was real. The memory of the night I discovered it returned to me like it happened yesterday. Henry was in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand. He thought I had gone to bed, but I had left my book in the parlor and went to get it. The light under the study door caught my eyes, so I lingered. I heard him talking on the phone, his voice low and strained. He was telling someone, her, I assumed, that he had made sure she'd be taken care of. My blood ran cold, but I stayed quiet, listening. After he went to bed that night, I went into the study. I knew Henry well enough to guess where he kept things hidden. In the bottom drawer, under the false lining, I found a document, a will, leaving nearly everything to Selena. The house, the savings, the stocks, even the land in Mississippi that had belonged to my grandfather before it passed to me and then Henry. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. But what Henry didn't know was that months earlier, we had signed another will together, one I insisted on after his first health scare. That one left everything to me with instructions that the children, all of them, would get their share after my passing. That was the will filed legally with our lawyer, the one I kept safe, the one Henry never managed to revoke because deep down he knew I'd fight him tooth and nail. So while Selena paraded around like the new queen of my husband's empire, I had the real crown tucked neatly away, waiting for the right moment. The thought made me smile again, sitting there in the dim light of the living room. But behind that smile was a storm, because I knew war was coming. The day after the funeral, Selena called me, not to offer condolences, not to bridge peace, but to gloat. "Clara," she said in that honey-dripping voice, "I know this is hard for you, but Henry wanted me to make sure you're taken care of. Don't worry, I'll let you stay in the guest house once everything is settled. I don't want to see you out on the streets." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles cracked. Guest house? Me? "I appreciate your concern," I managed, keeping my voice calm. "But you might want to hold off on packing my things. Nothing's been settled yet." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Clara, denial doesn't suit you. I'm the one Henry wanted to protect. You should accept that and be grateful I'm being generous." I hung up before she could say another word, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Generous. The nerve of that woman. I walked through the house that evening, touching the walls, the furniture, the pictures, reminding myself that this was my home. I had polished these floors, decorated these rooms, hosted countless family dinners here. No mistress was going to waltz in and erase me. Still, a part of me trembled. What if the court sided with her? What if my son stood by her and testified against me? What if the whispers in town grew louder, painting me as the bitter old wife who had been replaced? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled out the documents from my safe. The real will, signed, sealed, and legal. I ran my fingers over Henry's signature, staring at the ink strokes. Why, Henry? Why betray me like this? Why break me after I gave you everything? The silence that answered was heavier than grief. By morning, I had resolved myself. If Selina wanted a war, then a war she would have. I dressed in my best black dress and pearls, the ones Henry had bought me years ago when he still adored me. I went downtown to see our lawyer, Mr. Hughes. He was an older man, gray-haired, glasses perched on the tip of his nose, but sharp as a blade when it came to the law. When I placed the will on his desk, his eyes widened. "Clara, this changes everything," he said, adjusting his glasses. "This is the official will, filed and witnessed properly. The other one, if it exists, is meaningless unless he managed to file a revocation, which I can assure you he didn't." I felt a rush of relief wash over me, but it was quickly replaced with anger. "She thinks she's already won," I told him. "She's walking around like she owns my home. And my son." I trailed off, my throat tightening. "My son has turned his back on me for her." Mr. Hughes sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Families can be cruel in times like this, Clara. But you need to be ready. When this comes out, there will be a fight. She won't go quietly." "I don't expect her to," I said firmly, "but I won't go quietly either." When I left his office, I felt a fire burning in my chest. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt alive again. I had been humiliated, yes, betrayed, yes, but I wasn't powerless. I went home and stood in front of the mirror, studying the lines on my face, the silver in my hair. I was an old woman, but not a weak one. Life had tested me before, and I had endured. This was just another test. That night, I dreamed of Henry. He stood in the garden, his back turned to me. I called his name, but he didn't answer. When he finally turned, his face was blank, hollow, as if he had already faded into nothingness. I woke up with tears on my cheeks. The next morning, I prepared myself for the storm. I knew Selina would strike soon, and when she did, I would be ready. Because no mistress, no matter how pretty, no matter how cunning, was going to take the life I had built with my own 2 hands. Not while I still breathed. The first sign that Selina was preparing to make her move came 3 days after the funeral. I had just finished making a pot of coffee when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, there she stood in her high heels and perfume, holding a stack of papers in her manicured hands. Behind her, a sleek black car idled in the driveway, the kind of car Henry used to admire but never bought for himself. She had brought it here like a trophy. "Good morning, Clara," she said sweetly, as if we were old friends. "I thought I'd stop by with some documents, to make the transition smoother." "Transition?" I asked, my hand tightening on the doorknob. She held up the stack of papers, her smile spreading like poison. "These are preliminary filings. I'll be taking over Henry's assets, but I wanted to discuss arrangements for you. Like I said before, the guest house is available, and I will make sure you get a small allowance. I don't want to see you out on the streets." I shut the door in her face before she could say another word. My heart shook as I carried the coffee cup to the table. I didn't drink it. Instead, I sat there staring at the steam curling into the air until it disappeared, just like Henry's promises. Later that afternoon, my son came by. Marcus,
my firstborn, my pride and joy, or at least he had been once. He walked in without knocking, just like he used to when he was a boy, except this time, his face was hard, his eyes cold.
"Mom," he said flatly, "we need to talk." I braced myself. "About what?" He sighed, running a hand over his head. "About Dad's wishes. Selena told me you're giving her trouble. This doesn't have to be ugly. Dad wanted her taken care of. He loved her, Mom. You know that." His words struck me like a slap. "Loved her?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Marcus, your father was married to me for 40 years. I carried him through sickness, through hardship, through everything. And you dare stand here in my house and tell me he loved her?" He flinched, but didn't back down. "I'm not saying he didn't love you, but Selena, she was there for him in his final years. She made him happy. You have to accept that." "I don't have to accept anything," I snapped, my anger finally spilling out. "You may have chosen her over me, Marcus, but I will not be erased from my own life. Not by her, not by you, not by anyone." His jaw tightened. "Then you'd better prepare yourself, because when this goes to court, you'll lose. She has Dad's will." I laughed bitterly, though the sound tore my throat. "You really think she's won, don't you? You really think your father left me with nothing?" "Mom," his voice softened, almost pitying, "don't drag this out. It'll only make things worse for you." I stared at him, my son, the child I raised with my own blood and sweat. And in that moment, I realized he was gone. He had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. "Get out," I whispered. "Mom, get out," I screamed, slamming my hand on the table. He looked at me for a long moment, something flickering in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I collapsed into the chair, my body shaking. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Henry had done. A husband could stray, but a son? A son was supposed to be forever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house in my robe, touching the walls, the furniture, the photos. Every corner of this home held my fingerprints, my love, my labor. Selena could never understand that. She could never claim what I had built. When the court summons arrived 2 weeks later, I wasn't surprised. Selena was moving quickly, pressing to have Henry's assets transferred to her. She had money for lawyers, flashy ones with sharp suits and sharper tongues. She thought she could bury me under paperwork and procedure. But I wasn't alone. Mr. Hughes stood by me, calm and steady, a rock in the storm. "Clara," he said the night before the first hearing, "this will not be easy. Selena will put on a show, she'll parade witnesses, she'll twist Henry's words, she'll do everything to make you look bitter and unworthy. But remember, the law is on your side. The will we hold is valid. Don't let her rattle you." I nodded, though inside, fear gnawed at me. I had never been inside a courtroom except for jury duty decades ago. Now my entire life, my home, my legacy hung in the balance. The day of the hearing, I dressed in a simple navy dress, the pearls around my neck. I wanted to look dignified, not desperate. When I walked into the courtroom, Selena was already there, sitting in the front row beside Marcus. My son didn't even look at me. Selena, however, smirked, her hand resting on his arm like she had already replaced me entirely. When the judge entered and the proceedings began, my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the words. Selena's lawyer stood first, presenting her version of events. Henry had fallen out of love with me, found true companionship with Selena, and written a will to reflect his wishes. He painted her as the devoted partner, the one who had cared for Henry in his final days, while I was depicted as bitter, resentful, clinging to a past that no longer existed. When it was my turn, Mr. Hughes stood tall, his voice steady. "Your Honor, the document the plaintiff waves around is not legally binding. The official will, filed and witnessed properly, is here." He held up the paper like a sword. "This will leaves everything to Mrs. Clara Johnson, the lawful wife of 40 years, with provisions for the children upon her passing. This is the will of record. This is the truth." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Selina's face twisted, her smile vanishing for the first time. But it wasn't over. Witnesses were called. Selina's friends testified how much Henry loved her, how often he spoke of leaving me. My own son took the stand, his voice strong as he told the court how his father wanted Selina to be taken care of. Each word pierced me like a knife, but I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, my face calm. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Then it was my turn. I walked slowly to the stand, my heart thundering. I swore my oath and sat down, my eyes meeting the judge's. "Mrs. Johnson," Mr. Hughes said gently, "can you tell the court about your life with Henry?" I took a deep breath. "We were married for 40 years. I stood by his side through everything, when he lost his job, when he was sick, when we had nothing but hope to keep us going. I raised his children. I kept his home. I built his life with him. I may not have been the perfect wife, but I was the one who was there." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. "Selina may have shared his later years, but she did not build his life. I did." Selina's lawyer sneered. "And yet, Mrs. Johnson, your husband sought comfort elsewhere. Doesn't that say something about your marriage?" I lifted my chin. "It says something about him, not me." The courtroom went silent. For the first time, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I had spoken my truth, and no one could take that away from me. When I stepped down, Selina glared at me, her eyes burning. But I didn't flinch, because I knew this battle was far from over. But for once, she wasn't winning. That night, as I lay in bed, exhaustion washing over me, I thought of Henry again. I wondered if he was watching, if he regretted the mess he left behind. But then I remembered his hollow face in my dream, and I realized it didn't matter. This fight wasn't for him. It was for me, for my dignity, for the life I had built and would not let anyone steal. And I swore to myself that no matter how long it took, I would not rest until Selina was stripped of every lie she carried, because I was Clara Johnson, and I had not survived this long just to be erased.
When the gavel struck at the end of that first hearing, I thought I'd finally be able to breathe, but the air around me was still thick with poison. Selina didn't back down. If anything, the mask she wore cracked enough to reveal the hunger beneath. She wasn't just fighting for money, she wanted my life, my place, my dignity. And she wasn't alone. Marcus left the courthouse that day without even glancing my way. I watched him walk with her, his hand resting on her back as though she was the woman who had raised him, as though I were just a stranger. Something inside me broke quietly then, like a glass slipping from a counter. No sound, no sharp edges visible, but pieces scattered across my soul. I drove home in silence, the weight of the day pressing down on me. My house felt colder than ever. I passed the framed family portraits in the hallway, birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, and every smile in those pictures looked like a betrayal now. My own son's face, once my pride, seemed foreign. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair where Henry used to read his newspaper. I remembered how he'd fold the pages neatly, tap his glasses against the wood, and ask me what was for breakfast. Small, ordinary moments that had felt eternal then. Now, all I could see was the shadow of him, laughing with Selina, whispering promises to her while I was in the next room ironing his shirts. By nightfall, I couldn't hold it in. I wept until my chest hurt, until my throat felt raw. But even as tears soaked my cheeks, a fire began to smolder deep within me. Let Selima have her crocodile tears and her designer gowns. I had something she couldn't steal. 40 years of sacrifice, 40 years of endurance. That was my armor. The next week, the courtroom became a battlefield. Selina strutted in every day with a new outfit, her heels clicking like victory drums. She brought friends, people I had never seen before, but who swore under oath that they witnessed Henry speak about leaving everything to her. Each word felt like venom. She was his real companion, one woman said, dabbing her eyes dramatically. He told me Clara stopped caring years ago. He said Selina gave him joy. Joy. The word twisted in my stomach. What about the joy I gave him when I nursed him through pneumonia? When I sold my grandmother's brooch to keep food on the table during the hard years? Mr. Hughes leaned close to me, whispering, "Don't let it get to you. They're performing. The truth will cut through." But the truth felt buried under a mountain of lies. Then Marcus took the stand again. My heart raced as he raised his hand and swore the oath. He looked so much like Henry when he was young that for a fleeting second I wanted to forgive him. But the moment he opened his mouth, that illusion shattered. He said, "My father told me clearly that Selina was the one who cared for him in his final days. He wanted her provided for. He wanted her to have everything." Each sentence was a dagger, plunging deeper into me. I wanted to stand up and shout, "Liar! She bought you off!" But I stayed silent. My fingernails dug into my palm until the pain grounded me. When cross-examined, Marcus wavered slightly, hesitating when asked about dates and details. But Selina's lawyer smoothed it over with more slick questions, painting him as the loyal son torn between two women. Loyal. The irony nearly choked me. Outside the courtroom, whispers followed me like shadows. Old friends avoided my eyes. Neighbors who once waved from across the street now whispered that Henry had found happiness elsewhere. I became the villain in my own community, the bitter wife too proud to accept her husband's choices. One afternoon, as I walked to my car, a woman I had known from church stopped me. "Clara," she said softly, almost apologetically, "maybe it's best to let go. Selina is younger, she was there. Perhaps Henry really did love her." I stared at her, disbelief tightening my throat. 40 years, I whispered. 40 years I gave him, and you think that counts for nothing? She didn't answer. She just lowered her gaze and walked away. That night, I sat alone in the dark, clutching the real will in my hands. I traced Henry's signature with trembling fingers. I wanted to scream at him, ask him why he left me with this humiliation, why he forced me to fight tooth and nail for what was rightfully mine. But all I could do was whisper, "Why, Henry? Why betray me like this?" The next day in court, it was my turn again. Mr. Hughes called me to the stand, and I walked slowly, every eye in the room burning into me. I swore my oath and sat, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. Mr. Hughes began, "Mrs. Johnson, please tell the court about your marriage to Henry." I drew in a deep breath. "Henry and I were married for 40 years. We built a life together from nothing. There were times we had no money, no certainty, but we had each other. I raised our children, I kept our home, I stood by him when he was sick, when he was weak. I may not have been perfect, but I was his wife, the woman he chose, the woman who never left his side." Selina's lawyer smirked. "And yet, Mrs. Johnson, your husband turned to someone else. Doesn't that suggest you weren't enough?" The courtroom gasped softly, but I didn't flinch. I lifted my chin and answered, "No, it suggests
Henry was weak, not me. For a moment, the silence was so heavy it pressed against my chest. Then whispers rippled through the room. I held my head high, refusing to look at Selina, though I could feel her glare burning into me. When I stepped down, I saw Marcus watching me. For just a flicker of a second, his eyes softened. Then Selina touched his arm, and he looked away. The judge adjourned for the day, and I walked out into the cool air, my heart pounding but steady. For the first time, I felt like I had drawn blood in this war. But that night, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was low, almost threatening. "You should give up, Clara. Selina always wins. Don't drag this out. You'll only embarrass yourself more." I froze, clutching the phone to my ear. "Who is this?" But the line went dead. I sat in the silence of my home, fear creeping in around the edges of my resolve. They were trying to break me, to scare me into surrender, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I was Clara Johnson. I had survived betrayal, humiliation, and loss. I had raised children with nothing but grit and prayer, and I wasn't going to bow to a mistress and her lies. The next day in court, Selina's lawyer tried a new tactic. He produced a photograph of Henry and Selina together, smiling, holding hands. It was intimate, painful to see. He said, "Does this not prove that Henry's true affections lay with my client?" I stared at the photograph, my hands trembling. But then I looked at the judge and said firmly, "That photo proves Henry could smile for a camera. It does not erase 40 years of marriage, nor the legal will he signed. Pictures lie. Documents do not." The courtroom erupted in murmurs again. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in Selina's eyes. As the day ended, I realized this war was far from over. There would be more lies, more attacks, more betrayals. But I was ready. Because this wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about my dignity, my name, my life. And I would not let a mistress bury me while I was still alive.
The following days blurred into a haze of whispers, tense stares, and unanswered questions. Every corner of the house felt like it held a secret. Every shadow whispered a story I wasn't supposed to hear. But the truth had already found me, like a snake uncoiling from the dark. And once it had, there was no way to force it back into silence. I had thought the revelation about my parents' deceit would be the end of my illusions. I was wrong. It was merely the beginning. The more I tried to focus on my own life, on my work, and the little pockets of peace I used to carve for myself, the more I was pulled back into the chaos of my family. It was like being tethered to a sinking ship. You can swim, you can fight, but unless you cut the rope, you'll drown with them. And cutting that rope wasn't as easy as I wanted it to be. It was my blood, after all. Blood that had betrayed me. Blood that pretended loyalty while feeding lies into the very marrow of my bones. The arguments between my parents grew sharper, their voices rising at odd hours of the night. Sometimes I heard them behind closed doors, words laced with bitterness and desperation. Other times, they didn't even bother to hide it, letting the whole house hear the venom they spat at each other. My mother accused my father of destroying everything with his stubborn pride. My father accused my mother of weakness, of letting me see too much. And me? I was always the unspoken subject, the center of their conflict. Like a storm, neither of them knew how to survive. One evening, as I walked past their bedroom door, I froze at the sound of my father's voice. It was low, dangerous, like a knife scraping across stone. "If she keeps digging, we won't be able to control her. Do you understand that? One wrong word to the wrong person, and everything we built falls apart." Built. That word struck me. What exactly had they built? What foundation of lies, what empire of secrets was so fragile that my curiosity alone could topple it? My mother's reply was muffled, broken. "She's not a child anymore. You can't bully her into silence the way you used to. She'll fight you." A pause, long enough to make my heart race. Then my father's chilling words, "Then she'll learn what happens when you cross me." I slipped away before they could sense me at the door, but the words burned into my chest like a brand. My father had always carried himself like a man who expected obedience, but now I saw the threat behind the posture. It wasn't just authority. It was power laced with menace. I realized then that he wasn't just worried about my rebellion, he was prepared to crush it. The following morning, he acted as though nothing had been said. He sat at the breakfast table, reading the newspaper, sipping his coffee, and commenting on the news as though the world hadn't shifted under our feet. My mother busied herself with cleaning, her hands trembling whenever they came too close to his. The silence between them was more deafening than their fights. I sat across from them, every nerve on edge, staring at the man I thought I had known all my life. His face was calm, but his eyes, they held that same warning I had overheard in the dark. I realized I had a choice. I could let the fear swallow me whole, or I could let it fuel me. And so I started watching, not just the obvious, but the hidden. The way my father made phone calls late into the night, his voice hushed but urgent. The way my mother would linger in her room, staring at old photographs she kept hidden beneath her clothes. The way my brother, who had been so detached before, now walked around with a strange mix of arrogance and unease, as though he had been let in on a secret too heavy for him to carry. The pieces were everywhere, scattered like broken glass, and the more I picked them up, the more I cut myself. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't unsee what had already been shown to me. One night, when the house was quiet and I couldn't sleep, I crept into the study. It was my father's sanctuary, the place he never let anyone else touch. He always locked it when he left, but that night, in his haste, he had left the key hanging on the edge of his desk. My hands shook as I slipped it into the lock, every second stretching into eternity. The door opened with a soft click, and I stepped inside. The air smelled of leather and old paper, tinged with something metallic. The desk was cluttered with files, but it was the drawer he always kept locked that drew me in. I slid it open and froze. Documents, letters, and envelopes stuffed with cash spilled into view. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the papers. Contracts, signatures, deals written in words I didn't fully understand, but carried enough weight to send chills down my spine. And then, photographs. I picked them up with trembling fingers, my heart pounding as I recognized the faces. Not strangers, not distant figures, but people I knew. Family friends, neighbors, associates who had drifted in and out of our lives. Some of them smiling in casual gatherings, others caught in candid moments. But the notes scribbled on the back of each photo told a darker story. Debt. Owed. Loyal. Traitor. I didn't realize my eyes were wet until a tear slipped onto the paper. What was this? A ledger of loyalty? A map of manipulation? My father wasn't just controlling me, he was controlling everyone. The sound of footsteps made my blood run cold. I shoved the papers back into the drawer, heart racing, and slipped out just as the handle turned. I darted down the hall, pressing myself into the shadows. My father stepped inside, humming low, as though nothing was wrong, as though he hadn't just revealed himself to me in the most terrifying way. From that night on, I couldn't look at him the same way. The image of the father I once trusted was gone, replaced by the man who built empires on lies and threats. But he still tried to play the role, smiling at me across the dinner table, asking about my day, pretending nothing had shifted. But it had. I had shifted. And so had my mother. One evening, after my father had gone out, she came to my room.
Her face was pale, her eyes tired, but there was something in them I hadn't seen in years. Courage. She sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand. "You need to be careful," she whispered. "He won't let go of control, not without a fight." I squeezed her hand, searching her face for answers. Then why stay? Why live like this? Her silence was the loudest answer of all. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her out of the prison she had built around herself. But I understood. Fear had a way of turning walls into cages, and cages into homes. She had accepted hers. I would not accept mine. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every nerve alive with a single, undeniable truth. I couldn't wait for someone to save me. If I wanted freedom, if I wanted justice, I had to take it. And the only way to take it was to fight him with the one thing he never expected from me: strength.
The days that followed were a test of endurance. I played the part of the obedient daughter, nodding when spoken to, smiling when expected, hiding my defiance behind a mask. But behind that mask, I planned. Every detail mattered. Every conversation, every document, every hidden glance exchanged between my parents. I collected them all, piece by piece, building my own arsenal in silence. The fear was still there, gnawing at me, threatening to paralyze me. But it no longer owned me. What owned me now was the fire. The need to rise above the lies, to shatter the chains, to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. I knew the storm was coming. I could feel it in the way the air grew heavier, in the way my father's eyes lingered longer than before, suspicious, calculating. He sensed the change. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he would soon. And when that storm broke, it wouldn't just be his world that shattered. It would be all of ours. The house had become unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the curtains in the night wind seemed to carry his presence, even when he wasn't there. My father's shadow stretched longer than the walls could contain, his authority clinging to the air like smoke. And yet, beneath the weight of his control, something had shifted, something inside me that refused to break. I was no longer content to sit quietly and let him script my life. The mask I wore was cracking, and sooner or later, he would see the fury burning underneath. The morning began like every other. My father at the head of the table, newspaper folded just so, his coffee steaming. My mother moving about with hands that never seemed steady, her smile brittle, eyes dim. My brother pretending confidence, his jaw set in the way men do when they want to appear stronger than they feel. And me, sitting there, tasting bitterness in every bite of bread, watching them all like pieces on a chessboard. But something about that day felt different. My father's gaze lingered on me longer, sharp and probing. He asked simple questions about my plans, my work, my friends. Yet I could tell they weren't questions. They were tests. He was gauging me, weighing my answers like a judge listening for cracks in testimony. And though my heart pounded in my chest, I answered smoothly, smiling where I needed to, lying when I had to. Still, I knew he sensed something. Later that afternoon, I overheard him on the phone again. His voice was tight, clipped, filled with anger that he tried to restrain. I couldn't catch every word, but the pieces I did made my blood run cold. She's watching me. No, not yet. If she crosses the line, then we end it. End it. The words clawed at me. Was he talking about me? About us? About the fragile thread of family that still held this house together? I didn't know. But I knew I had no choice but to prepare. The night stretched long and restless. I lay awake in my room, staring at the ceiling, when I heard a knock. Soft, hesitant. My mother's silhouette slipped through the crack of the door, her nightgown swaying around her thin frame. She looked at me with eyes that seemed older than her years, full of sorrow and secrets. "Do you know what he's planning?" she whispered, her voice breaking. I sat up, my heart leaping. What do you mean? She closed the door behind her and came closer, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of my bed. He's not just afraid of you knowing the truth. He's afraid of losing everything he's built. He'll do whatever it takes to protect himself, whatever it takes. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to press her for answers, but she shook her head fiercely, as though speaking too much would condemn us both. Instead, she gripped my hands. Promise me, whatever happens, you won't let him destroy you. Tears welled in my eyes. For years she had been silent, obedient, bending under his will, but now I saw a glimpse of the woman she might have been before fear caged her. And for the first time I realized she was warning me because she truly believed he could. I promise, I whispered, though my voice trembled. That night, as I watched her slip out of my room, I understood something crucial. My father's war was no longer just against me. It was against anyone who dared to break free from his control, and I had already taken the first step towards rebellion. Days passed, each one tighter, more suffocating. My father's questions grew sharper, his watchfulness heavier. My mother tried to shield me, but I could see the toll it took. Her shoulders hunched, her smile weaker, her hands constantly wringing together. My brother avoided me, though I caught him staring sometimes, a mix of guilt and fear in his eyes. I wanted to ask him what he knew, but the wedge my father had driven between us kept him silent. Then came the evening that changed everything. Dinner was nearly over. The clink of cutlery against plates, the soft hum of the chandelier, the suffocating silence. It was all so ordinary, so rehearsed. Until my father set his fork down with deliberate calm and looked straight at me. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his tone deceptively smooth. I forced a smile. "Just busy." "Busy with what?" His eyes pinned me like a predator to its prey. I felt my pulse quicken. "Work? Friends? Life?" He leaned back, studying me. Then with a slight smirk, he said, "Funny. For someone so busy, you always seem to have time to linger around places you shouldn't. My study, for example." The blood trained from my face. My fork clattered against the plate. My mother's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. My brother froze mid-bite, staring between us. "I don't know what you mean," I said quickly, though the lie felt weak in my mouth. He chuckled, low and dangerous. "You think I don't notice? You think I built this by being blind?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a growl. "You've been snooping, poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Tell me, what did you find?" The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's hands trembled as she set her glass down, her lips parting as though to intervene, but no sound came out. My brother stared at his plate, refusing to look at me. And me? I sat there, every muscle rigid, my mind racing. If I denied it, he wouldn't believe me. If I admitted it, he would destroy me. So I did the only thing I could. I met his gaze head-on, even though my hands shook under the table. "Enough to know the truth," I said softly. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment the mask slipped. I saw the fury beneath, raw and unrestrained. The air in the room seemed to crackle, charged with danger. Then slowly he smiled, a smile that chilled me to the bone. "Careful," he murmured. "Truth is a dangerous thing. It can set you free, or it can bury you." I held his gaze, refusing to flinch, even though my hands shook under the table. He wanted me afraid, broken, begging for forgiveness, but I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence, every bite tasting like ash in my mouth. When it ended, he rose calmly, kissed my mother's cheek, and walked away as though nothing had happened, but his words lingered in the corners of my mind. That night I couldn't sleep. My body buzzed with adrenaline, my chest heavy with dread. I replayed every word, every look, every clue I had gathered. He knew I was onto him, and now the game had shifted. It wasn't just about secrets anymore. It was about survival. I thought of my mother's warning. I thought of my brother's silence. I thought of the photographs and documents hidden in his drawer. And I knew then I couldn't wait any longer. If I didn't act soon, he would. I rose from my bed and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes red from sleepless nights, but there was fire there too. Fire that refused to be smothered. I whispered to my reflection, a vow only I could hear. You won't bury me, not this time. I'll bury you first. And in that moment, I stopped being the daughter he thought he could control. I became his enemy.
The courtroom smelled of polished wood and cold air, the kind of place where truth was supposed to shine. But I knew better. Truth wasn't given here. It was fought for, clawed out with blood and grit. And today, I would fight. My heart hammered in my chest as I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer beside me, a steady hand on my arm as though to remind me I wasn't alone. But in my bones, I felt alone. I felt the weight of every betrayal, every night of loneliness, every whispered insult. They had written me off as a grieving old widow too weak to fight. But they were about to learn that grief, when sharpened, can cut sharper than a blade. Across the aisle sat Vanessa. She was immaculate, her red dress tailored to perfection, her makeup sharp enough to slice. She sat with a smug tilt of her chin, her arm possessively linked with Marcus, my own son, who wouldn't even look in my direction. My daughter Angela sat behind me, her presence like a quiet anchor. But the betrayal of Marcus weighed heavier than any storm I had ever weathered. He had chosen her, this woman who stole his father, stole his inheritance, stole his loyalty. When the judge entered and the proceedings began, Vanessa's lawyer rose with the confidence of a man certain of victory. He held up the papers, Charles's so-called last will and testament, and spoke as though it were gospel. Your Honor, Mr. Johnson left explicit instructions that his estate be transferred entirely to Miss Vanessa Brooks, the woman who cared for him in his final years when his wife was absent and uninvolved. Every word was a dagger. I could feel the whispers ripple through the courtroom. My absence? My uninvolvement? Did they know how many nights I sat by Charles's bedside, cooling his fever, praying over his stubborn body? Did they know how often he pushed me away, listening to Vanessa's poison instead of my prayers? I kept my face still, though my hands gripped each other so tightly I thought my bones might crack. Then, it was my lawyer's turn. He stood, his voice measured but strong. Your Honor, while that document may appear valid, we have reason to believe undue influence was exerted on Mr. Johnson by Miss Vanessa Brooks. Furthermore, this is not the only will Mr. Johnson ever signed. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, and I saw her nails dig into Marcus's arm. She hadn't expected this. She thought I'd roll over too broken to fight, but she was wrong. The judge leaned forward. Do you have evidence of this claim? And then it happened. My lawyer turned toward me, and I reached into my bag, pulling out the folder I had kept hidden for years. My hands trembled as I placed it on the table, but my resolve was steel. Yes, Your Honor, my lawyer said, lifting the document for all to see. This is the original will, drafted and signed 5 years before Mr. Johnson's decline, when he was of sound mind and judgment. It leaves the Johnson estate to his lawful wife, Loretta Johnson, with provisions for their children. The gasp that rippled through the room was like a wave crashing against stone. Vanessa's face drained of color, her lips parting soundlessly. Marcus blinked rapidly, his confidence faltering. The judge examined the document, flipping through each page, checking the seals, the signatures, the dates.
The silence stretched unbearably, every second a lifetime. Finally, the judge looked up. This will appears properly executed and legally binding. Unless opposing counsel can provide evidence to the contrary, this supersedes the later contested version. Vanessa shot to her feet. "This is a lie! She forged it! She's desperate!" Her voice cracked, hysteria bleeding through her composure. She turned to Marcus, gripping his arm. "Tell them, Marcus! Tell them your father wanted me to have everything!" Marcus's face was pale, his jaw tight. For the first time, he looked at me. Our eyes locked, and I searched for the boy I had raised, the child I had nursed and comforted. But all I saw was confusion, shame, and the realization that he had gambled on the wrong side. The judge's gavel came down sharply. Order. Miss Brooks, sit down or be removed. Vanessa's protests echoed through the courtroom, but it didn't matter anymore. The tide had turned. I had done it. When the ruling was read, affirming me as the rightful heir to Charles's estate, the tears I had held back for so long finally spilled over. But they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of vindication. Vanessa slumped into her seat, her face twisted in rage and disbelief. Marcus sat rigid, his eyes darting between me and her, torn apart by his own betrayal. Angela squeezed my hand, her own eyes shining with pride. As the gavel struck one last time, I rose to my feet. My knees ached, my body weary, but my spirit soared. For years, they had tried to erase me, to diminish me, to cast me aside like a worn-out shoe. But here I stood, unbroken, unbowed, the rightful matriarch of the Johnson family. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters swarmed. Vanessa stormed past them, her face a mask of fury, refusing to answer their questions. Marcus trailed behind her, his shoulders slumped, his steps heavy. Angela and I walked out together, her arm linked with mine, and I held my head high. The mansion loomed ahead when we returned home. My home, the place where I had raised my children, where I had poured my soul into every brick and beam. For a moment, I stood at the door, my hand resting on the handle, overwhelmed by the weight of memory. Then I stepped inside, reclaiming what was mine. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift. Vanessa vanished from the public eye, her reputation in tatters. The community that once whispered about my weakness now praised my strength. Old friends came forward, some ashamed for doubting me, others inspired by my endurance. Marcus, my son, he didn't come home. Not right away. He drifted in Vanessa's shadow, lost in his guilt and pride. Angela tried to speak of him gently, reminding me that blood is blood, but the wound was still fresh. I couldn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe one day, but not now. I focused instead on rebuilding mine. I hired back the workers that Nessa had dismissed, restored the dignity of Charles's business, and reopened our doors to the community. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was leading, commanding, thriving. One evening I stood in the dining room, the table set for a family dinner. Angela's children ran through the halls, their laughter echoing, filling the mansion with warmth again. Angela herself was in the kitchen, humming as she stirred a pot. For the first time in years, the house felt alive. I walked to the head of the table and touched the back of the chair where Charles once sat. My heart ached, not with longing, but with release. He had chosen poorly, hurt me deeply, but he had also left me with the tools to rise above. Angela appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Mama, they're hungry. You ready to eat?" I smiled back, a real smile, one that reached my soul. "Yes, baby, let's eat." As I took my seat at the head of the table, surrounded by the love of those who had stood by me, I realized something profound. They had tried to strip me of everything, my home, my legacy, my dignity. But they forgot one thing. You cannot steal what was built on truth, faith, and sacrifice. I raised my glass, my voice steady, carrying through the room. To family, to strength, to never letting anyone erase who we are. The clinking of glasses, the laughter, the warmth, it was all mine again. And as the night unfolded, I felt the final chains of betrayal fall away. Vanessa had thought she won. My son had thought I was powerless. Even my husband had underestimated me. But I had shown them all. I was Loretta Johnson, widow, mother, fighter, and above all, survivor. And this legacy, my legacy, would endure long after the lies and betrayals had turned to dust.
If this story touched your heart, if you felt the weight of Loretta's fight and the victory she earned, don't leave without showing your love. Go ahead and hit that like button. It lets us know her struggle resonated with you. Subscribe to the channel and tap the bell so you won't miss the next powerful story we bring to life. And please drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel, and your voice matters here.